Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Good evening, I'm Duncan Elkinson and I'm an alcoholic. My name is Duncan Elkinson and I'm an alcoholic. Duncan's an alcoholic, Duncan's an alcoholic, Duncan's an alcoholic. I'm not chanting. I'm celebrating. Saying that I'm an alcoholic was the first honest thing that I said in my adult life. And sometimes it's hard for me to be honest, and they've asked me to be honest with you for the next 45 minutes. So we may have to stop and let me semi-chant again so I can get in touch with that. I want to be very grateful from the beginning. I'm happy to be here. This is a home group for me. I want to thank Don for asking me to share. I want to thank Casey for doing such a wonderful job for energizing our meeting. You truly are our trusted servant. Some of the fellows and I last year studied the steps and traditions together, and it worked. And we turned right around and started doing it again. And so we're on tradition 2 this week, and we've asked each other to dedicate our week to the step or tradition or concept that we're studying that week. And so I want to dedicate this share tonight to our beautiful second tradition. For our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. And this is part of my group conscience. I've been coming up here been taking cakes here since I was 6 or 7. And I had a commitment here last year and the year before. So this is one of my home groups, and this is part of my group conscience, and I'm happy to be sharing my life and my sobriety with you tonight. Congratulations to the newcomers, Sonny, the shy, Jason, the anonymous. But we found you, and thank God you found us. Thank you, Lenore, for reading chapter 5, and for your chip, 9 months, 3/4 of a cake. And Jim for reading chapter 3. I like meetings that read chapter 3, particularly the whole extended portion of chapter 3 where it talks about all the things I did and didn't do. You know, except that part about taking a trip, not taking a trip. I never had a problem with that. I took them. You know, Father Martin talked about being an alcoholic who broke out in spots. He would wake up in Cleveland or Chicago. I woke up in Paris, London. Yeah. Actually, I woke up on the floor of a hotel room in London. Let's not go there. Congratulations, Michelle, on 9 months. Did I congratulate Cammie for 6 months? It's really great to see so many newcomers here at Playa in Westchester. First time I came to this meeting, I got lost. I believed it was still in Playa, you know. And very happy birthdays. Well, first I should welcome the Al-Anon. There are a lot of those here tonight, too. What is that about? I'm at a meeting one night, a big meeting, and the guy speaking is sitting next to me, and he's got a ton of time. And there were a lot of Al-Anons, and we were applauding. It was really great because, you know, you have Al-Anons, you know they're going to have someone to help clean up. So we're applauding. And he took enormous offense at us applauding. He leaned over to me, he said, "Don't encourage them." I think it's great. It's a healthy sign. In my wreckage, I probably have enabled or qualified half a dozen or more close family, friends, or relatives for Al-Anon, and none of them go. You know, but I'm happy to have them. And welcome to our Al-Tots, Jack, the Sunday night chip boy, and sober Alexandra, who may be being changed even as we speak. Dina's precious baby, and of course our Ala pup. Thank you, Faith, who has returned to Doggy Central. I get extra credit if I mention Doggy Central by name from the podium. Faith has taken the puppy back. That dog's name is Krispy Kreme, which somehow is fitting for an AA group. Most importantly, congratulations to all you folks who took birthday cakes. Dina and Jim, and I know these people on my road of happy destiny. Lisa and Francesca, congratulations. Joe, I told you during the break, you spoke at the beach when I hit 6 or 7 years, and you were happy. You know, it was just wonderful. And I thought, you know what? This guy just gave me permission to be happy. Page 135 is right. We absolutely insist on enjoying life. And it all added up to 46 years of sobriety here tonight. If we add up the bits and pieces of the chip people, it's 47. And that's a real celebration. That's a real victory, and I wanted to acknowledge that. I was at a meeting Tuesday night where some alder cocker took a cake for 31 years. And I see him at meetings all the time. I didn't know he had that much time. Turned right around, gave his sponsor a cake for 38. And that's important for me to see. I'm deep into my 14th year now, or 3 months into it. And it's great for me to see people who have more time being more active than I am. I need to know that there's something in it, the second decade and the third decade and the fourth decade. And so I really admire you folks who are such good examples to me. Again, I'm glad to be here, and now I want to tell you what it was like. I drank. It sucked. I had to give it up. Can we go home now? No. I owe it to Sonny and Jason and the other new people to tell you how I drank. I'll try not to overdo it, but here we go. I discovered my fine palate for wine when I was a graduate student in San Francisco in 1970 or whatever, and I was off and running. I had an excellent palate for wine. People told me that, you know, and I learned all the proper adjectives of wine, and I could memorize wines. I could taste wines blindfolded. I wrote about wine. You know, and I thought because mine wines came from France, Appellation Contrôlée, you know, and had corks in them, that I couldn't possibly be an alcoholic. And for a long time, I deluded myself into thinking I didn't have a problem with wine. And the reason I didn't think I had a problem with wine is because I had successfully, or so I thought, kept it to myself. People didn't know that I drank every night. I was a loner. I could be, you know, the life of the party but not drunk. I could get home by myself, and, you know, it's a very strong moral argument. If, you know, if you fall down flat on your face in your own apartment and there's no one there to pick you up, well, did you really get drunk and pass out? Or did you just go to bed early? You know, like 3 feet before the bed. And that went on for years. And because I wrote about wine, and wine had such an importance in my business, I got a graduate degree in rhetoric and public address, and became a society caterer. You know, that's why you would go to graduate school. But that's all right. I bought my tarts from 3 guys from Berkeley. 2 had PhDs. The other only had a master's, but it was in engineering. They baked tarts, so, you know, it was all right for me to be a caterer. And because I thought wine went with everything, I catered 15,000 parties. That's a lot of parties. It was 2,500 weddings. It was 1,500 bar mitzvahs. They all come with a mother. They all come with a mother. 5,000 charity events. That could be the worst of all. And not a one of them was ever a dry party. I never catered a dry party until I came to... I made contributions to dry parties. You know, they needed to borrow equipment for something for the Salvation Army or whatever, and I loaned it to them, but I certainly didn't go to them. You know, I did baby showers. I had a famous author who was one of my clients. She was instrumental in getting me back to writing. And she had baby showers. She had 6 of them in a row. She had them every 9 months and 15 minutes. And there was a baby shower every year, and there was always wine and champagne. Chateau Yquem, you know, a late harvest white wine, a Sauterne, a dessert wine. At every one of these. I'm lusting. There's a drool joke? God, for the longest time, I couldn't go to Italian restaurants. Anyone have that problem? The people are shaking their heads. Yeah. Because there's such a prevalence of red wine. You can smell it from table to table, particularly if you got your nose in the person's glass, like me. But I associated food with wine for a long time. My last drink was a Côte de Rhône, a wonderful, wonderful Côte de Rhône that's sort of a mid-region of France. It's a Burgundy. Yeah. Well, they say the Côte de Rhône, you can taste the earth in it, that the roots pull the dirt up right into the grapes. I used to serve it with lamb. I had a big problem with rack of lamb for years. I used to tell the stories about my hobbies. I think everyone should have a hobby and be inventive. My father invented styrofoam, which was one hell of a good living. So I invented flavored vodkas. I mean, long before Smirnoff or, someone else put a little sliver of lime in something. I was really stuffing it down. And I experimented with everything. My hobby was kept in the freezer portion of my apartment refrigerator in San Francisco. I used square mason jars. Joe drank out of a Pyrex mixing bowl or something, didn't you? Yes, I remember. Every time I pull my mixing cup out, I think of Joe. But I used square mason jars because you could fit more of them in, and you didn't want to waste any space. And you could also hold on to them. They didn't slip as much. But I found that flavored vodka with strawberries was best. And I used to tell everyone how I did it and how I'd gone through all the other fruits and vegetables to get there. Plums really don't work. They just don't. It looks just like snot, tastes just like snot. It didn't work. But strawberries, dim's the thing. Years ago, I stopped telling people how I did it because after a meeting, someone came up and said, that's disgusting. You stood up there and gave them a recipe for relapse. So I didn't say anything about it for years. I'm sensitive. Maybe you don't identify with that. So I was speaking last year, and I said something about the flavored vodka, and it was someplace out the other end of town, and your car says you've gone 5 miles beyond any length. You have to look at a map to find the church. Afterwards, a guy comes up to me and says, "You go to the beach meeting, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, I've been going to the beach for years. I got a commitment there 9 years already." He says, Yeah. You gave us that recipe for those strawberry vodka." And I thought, oh no, this guy's got a horror story. And he goes, I said, "Yes, that was me." He goes, "You know what? Every time I wanted to drink, I thought of how silly you must have looked drinking that strawberry flavored vodka. And it kept me sober these last 5 years." On that note, I want to thank my kind and loving higher power, a higher power I choose to call Bubba, a higher power with a sense of humor, who's all-knowing and all-wise, and most importantly, all-forgiving. God forgives us immediately. We're supposed to forgive each other as fast as possible. How come we take so long forgiving ourselves? And I wrestled with it a lot last year. What happened? Gosh, I'd like to know. All of a sudden, it wasn't fun anymore. By the time I was 30, I was on the educational board of the San Francisco Opera, which meant that I got to spend my entire life in a tuxedo. Not just the time I was catering. And then I had a day off. I was at the Opera House. I love the opera. I'm a legend in my own shower. I can't remember seeing the last act of anything since La Boheme at the Met in 1970. It was 1970, it was the last year Grandma was alive. All right, because I always went home. I snuck out to go home because I didn't think anyone would know that I had to put away my hobby or a bottle of red wine before I went to bed every night, and did it for 15 years. I didn't think anyone knew because I didn't get drunk in public. The truth of the matter is that, keeping that type of secret was what kept me going longer and that it wasn't truly a secret. When I finally got sober, no one seemed to be surprised that I had had a problem of some sort. Several people expressed relief that it wasn't something worse. They thought I had some strange disease where I sort of dropped off to sleep in the middle of conversations. I was just drunk, you know? I had a business manager who left 7 checks for me to sign one day. I signed one check 7 times and thought it was enormously funny. I took a very important client to lunch, Stanford Court, 4 courses, 8 wines. There was a glass of each. They ranged from sort of gray all the way to very tawny red. I drank all 8 of them, and probably hers too. She dropped me off at my shop. My housekeeper found me halfway up the stairs with my shirt off. Well, I changed my shirt after lunch, so it wasn't, I hope that's what was going on. That client who had written me checks for 6 figures for parties never called me again. To this day, I haven't been able to find out what I did or said at that lunch, all right? And I didn't think I had blacked out. I do recall my housekeeper at the shop, she was the lady who polished the silver and didn't speak any English, saying to me in whatever language it was that I understood very clearly, "You're going home and you're going home right now." And I said, "No, Flora." And her son, who was working after school, came up to me and said, "Mr. Duncan, I have to take you home, and if you don't go home, I'll be in big trouble with my mother." And that's all I remember, until I woke up the next morning. I didn't really wake up. He woke me back up the next morning, pounding on my front door. And I knew something unusual had happened because I was in a set of brown silk pajamas, which must have taken 5 or 6 yards of silk to make. You know, I suppose everyone has a set of pajamas, you know, in a drawer somewhere. How this kid found mine, I'll never know. How he got me into them, I don't want to know. You know. I don't think either one was an easy task. All right. But I kept telling myself I didn't have a problem. And the job started going away, and the people started going away. You know, there's this concept in the Orient about having faith. Maybe you've heard that. You know, if someone is said to have good, big faith, well, it seems that everyone's born with a faith. And if you do good things, your faith gets added to. So if you have big faith, it means you've done so many good things that when you walk down the street, people can't help but see you. They have to say, "Oh, hello, big face," or "Thank you, Mr. Big Face," or "Happy day to you, Mr. Big Face," because you've got this big face. Well, it works in reverse, and that's what happened to me. You know, alcohol taught me how to lie and cheat and steal, and every time you do something undesirable, some of your face comes off. So when you hear someone say, "Oh, he has no face," that means you can walk right down the street and people won't notice you because they can't see you because you don't have a face. And the end of my drinking, I had no face. People didn't return phone calls, people didn't make phone calls, and I didn't know why. I came to New Year's Eve, 1986, 1987, in a hotel room in Amsterdam, not the sobriety capital of the world by any means. I was awakened by fireworks. Actually, I thought I was in Beirut. I was having an out-of-town experience. And that's how I know when my last drink was, because there was a good half bottle of that Côte d'Aron left on the nightstand, and I should have finished it. There was something on the mirror and something in the ashtray, and I should have finished them too, and I didn't. I sat looking out the window for the longest time, and then went back to bed. And in the morning I left them on the nightstand and went downstairs. Now, I didn't know it then, but I can tell you now, God did for me what I could not do for myself. A power far greater than me, who was all-knowing, all-loving, all-wise, all-forgiving, and has a sense of humor, decided to do me a great big favor, and I was struck sober that New Year's Day, 1987. And was totally ungrateful for it for at least the next 2 years. I spent the rest of that week in Amsterdam going to the Van Gogh Museum. I went to the Van Gogh exhibit when I was here last year. It was scary because I saw all those paintings detoxing. And they do it chronologically. You know, this year, that year, this year, that year, and then they do it this month, next month, the month after, and then it's the last week of his life, and then it's the last 3 days, and you're just going into this descent into madness. And I spent a lot of time with my nose pressed up against those paintings that week, not knowing what I had done or why I was doing it. I got back to San Francisco. I called a friend who was also my doctor. We were on the opera board. I was on the opera board with him. This guy was president of his hospital and president of his gentleman's club and was a good friend, and I didn't know that he was sober. And I told him I'd stopped drinking. He said, "Did you stop the rest of it too?" And I didn't think he knew. I hadn't kept any of those secrets. And I said, "Yes," a little nervously, and he said, "Well, good, your health will improve. Why don't you try staying clean and sober for the next 6 months?" I said, "Why 6 months? Why don't I get it all out of my system in a couple of weeks?" He said, "Give it 6 months." And for a couple of months he would call and see if I would go to a meeting with him. I went to a couple of meetings, and it didn't pertain to me. People didn't drink where I drank. I just thought he was trying to be a jolly do-gooder. I didn't think it pertained to him. I never had a bottle that, I had to wrap in a brown paper bag. Well, maybe a couple in college, but no. After a couple of months, he stopped calling. His mother died. And a couple of months after that, he got a brain tumor and died. And I never really knew what he wanted to tell me at 6 months. But I stayed dry. I remember going and taking a 6-month trip in honor of him. But I was definitely not happy. And I stayed dry and in total anger and rage for another 2 years. I gave wine tastings. I wrote reviews of wine. I paired wines with food. I won one of my chefs a trip to Europe. Never tasted the stuff. But I knew what they were. He was one of the students at the Culinary Academy. He won a week in Italy, for which I got 1 pound of rice nurtured from the waters of Lake Guarda. Not that I have any resentment that maybe with therapy I couldn't get over. I had been hoping for a bag, a Gucci bag filled with sun-dried tomatoes or something, but I got the pound of rice. God bless him. And I spent the first 1.5 to 2 years of my recovery, of my sobriety, dry and angry. And I had a breakdown. My cat died. I'd had a cat for 18 years. I was going for a world record. 3 days after the cat died, a friend broke down the door. I thought he was being dramatic. He was a cop, And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I need to go get food for Algernon, the cat." He said, "Algernon's gone and you're in big trouble." I spent 2 weeks with some friends who were a doctor, and they sent me to a place in Rhode Island for a couple of months. And I realized I hadn't come to grips with who I was or what I was doing in life. I closed my apartment in San Francisco. I moved to Southern California. And again, a kind and loving higher power did for me what I couldn't do for myself. And that is, I got to find a higher power. We got to the second tradition this week. The week before was the second step. And part of what we did was write a letter to a newcomer talking about which of the 5 types of alcoholics we were. If you read your 12 and 12, chapter 2, it talks about 5 types of alcoholic. I was the belligerent and the intellectually self-sufficient. And I thought I didn't need a higher power. I went to church socially, good music or something. Here I was in Southern California, living in vastly reduced circumstances. Again, no face. Dry and unhappy. And a friend took me to a church one Sunday for just something to do to fill the day. And I met my first sponsor, who was an ordained minister who ran a mission on Hollywood Boulevard. And I found the God of my understanding on a park bench at Hollywood and Western one night. And it made all the difference in the world. Now, you can find just about anything you're looking for on a park bench at Hollywood and Western. Some of you drank there, yes? Yes, all right. But I happened to have found God. It was a Tuesday. It was a little earlier than this, probably February or March. It had been raining. It was cold. And the chaplain had a few of his closer friends over for dinner that night, about 150 of them. They weren't the type of people you sent invitations to because most of them didn't have addresses. And he thought, seeing how I'd been so big in catering and the opera and all, that I would like to cook for his friends. The chaplain was a man of great accomplishments. He could sing any hymn or any aria you wanted. He'd been a prize fighter and an actor, and he had a place about the size of, from those pictures to the wall. He slept on a mattress on a concrete floor next to a refrigerator that didn't work, that he kept AA pamphlets in. He had a 4-burner stove, 2 of which worked. And while he had done many, many things in his life, he had never really cooked. So he really just thought I would just be so happy to be turned loose in his beautifully appointed kitchen week after week, cooking dinner for his friends. And he didn't much care how I did it. So I arrived that Tuesday. I had walked in the rain. It was my only day off. We had been doing our steps the second time through, biblically, Old Testament and New Testament. His higher power may not be the God of my understanding, but I was certainly happy to have the knowledge it was very much the God of his understanding. He was a kind and loving fellow, and that day he offended me deeply by taking some old fellow off the street who decided he was going to get sober. He did all 12 steps with that guy before lunch. All 12. I was writing page after page. And I found that he had really overstocked for the party. There were about 5 pounds of bad rice. You know, that sort of gummy white stuff with the broken kernels that you get in Chinese restaurants, you know, gummy rice. And that was about it. And I said, you know, Chaplain, it's raining, it's cold, we're out of clothes in the clothes room, and all I can find is 5 pounds of rice. What are you going to do about this? And he said, you know, something, I think you ought to sit down and maybe pray for a while and have a cup of coffee. And then you should get the list out and start making some calls. Well, I definitely didn't pray, and I don't think I made a cup of his very bad instant coffee. I'm not sure what I did. But after about 20 minutes, I pulled out the list and started dialing for dollars. He had a list of church ladies. His hobby on Sundays when he wasn't going to the county hospital to pass out AA tracts to the dying liver patients was to do guest minister at all these big churches. And he would tell them, you know, his Bible told him to feed the hungry and clothe the naked and comfort the desolate, and if they weren't into doing that, they could pay him to. And it worked. He had a good list. We called them taps. And so I started calling, you know, and you'd call up, and they'd say hello, and I'd say hello, and how's the chaplain, they'd ask, you know, and then I'd do my spiel about it's cold and it's raining and we don't have any food. They'd say, what could we do? And, you know, I'd suggest something, you know. And it went on most of the morning anyway. The last one was the real ditz of all times. Presbyterian, some big outfit out in Van Nuys, some uncharted wilderness out that way. I get around, how's the chaplain? He's so nice. What do you need today? Well, we're all out of blue jeans. We're all out of Levi's. Oh, do you need some dungarees for the fellows? I said, yes. How many would you like? We'd have taken anything, lady. Anything, you know. I said, 48. She said, oh, okay. What size? You know, like steal me a Cadillac, make it blue. You know. I said, 34 and 36. She said, okay. What color? I said, blue. And by the way, we're out of socks and underwear. Oh, I'll get some. It's illegal in LA County to give used socks or underwear to the poor. An aside that I mention in case anyone has access to political reins. And along about 4 o'clock, they started arriving. Sure enough, you know, they'd get up to the door. Now, they never got out of, this was Hollywood Boulevard at Western. And they drove Buicks, you know. They never got out. Even in good weather, they never got out. A famous actor once pulled up and honked, and we went out and he gave us a check for $1,000. He didn't get out. You know. The church ladies certainly didn't get out. But they'd honk and I'd wave and they'd wave and I'd wave, and then eventually I'd go and get it, you know. And people had made brownies, and in fact one lady did about 200 really good brownies. I got to tell you, I don't eat store-bought brownies. I have bridge work. All right, but these were good, and I put 6 aside because I'd been having a bad day. Relatively speaking. And then, of course, the last one, it was 4:30, 5 o'clock. The last one was this big Oldsmobile, you know, and it was the Ditzoid from Van Nuys, and she honked and I waved, and she waved and I waved, and she had a button, and she pushed the button, and up comes the trunk of the car, and I went out, and there was a box with 24 pairs of size 34 Levi's and 24 pairs of size 36 Levi's, and a great big white bag from Mervyn's or something with 6 dozen jockey shorts and 6 dozen pairs of tube socks. And she better have had a button that shut the dang thing, because I scooped him up and went back inside and never acknowledged her. And that night, you know, people feasted. People were at least wearing dry clothes, or clean ones at that. And when I left with my bag of 6 brownies, having made a decision to treat myself to a bus ride home, the chaplain met me at the door and shook my hand and thanked me and said, "Thank you, you've done a wonderful job. You made all of this possible," and I let him. And I went out and I sat down on the bus bench waiting for the bus. And it was drizzling. People reported that I was crying later, but it was because it was drizzling. And there were lights coming by, and all of a sudden I started to shake and really started to cry, because I realized I hadn't done any of that. A power far greater than me really had turned that day around. And even though I hadn't been happy, at least 150 people were made happy, because I did a little work and stood out of the way. And people who were happy to be of service even though I wasn't grateful for them being of service. People I hadn't thanked. You know, I hadn't cried when I buried my parents. I mean, I wasn't used to crying for real. And it changed. Everything changed for me right then and there. I knew there was, of course I would have to have an Old Testament wrath of God, burning bush spiritual experience. That was it. You know, knock, knock, Duncan, I'm here, I love you. Write this down. God loves you. A friend gave me a sign that I kept on the mirror. God doesn't need you today. Why don't you try having a good day? And I've tried very hard ever since. I very seldom have a bad day anymore. I have bad moments. You don't want to be in the same town as I am then. But I don't have bad days anymore. I used to have bad administrations. You know, I drank through 4 solid years of a Carter administration. I don't even know why. Total blackout. I'm not sure what I resented about the poor guy. That doesn't happen anymore. And I know that if I'm having a bad day, I have an instant release by just calling any newcomer or being of service at any meeting. And then I get out of my own way. And I may not work the best program. I may not be a spiritual giant. But when it comes to not having bad days, I at least have the AA cure down fairly pat. If I get out of my own way and do something, hopefully anonymously, of good or value for someone else, I've got half a chance of staying sober. I've been blessed. I spoke to you earlier about this being part of my group conscience. I'm blessed these days with having a good, solid group conscience, and the reason I want to have a strong group conscience, the reason I need to go to AA meetings and support the group conscience, is because I hear the voice of my higher power through your shares. Just the way you read chapter 5 or chapter 3, I have to listen to it differently and get something new out of it. When you're telling your story, you're telling my story. I have to listen to you to understand who I am. And if I pray and meditate, it's fine, but if I want to hear the voice of Bubba, I have to listen to you people. And I do that by being of service. And I have some good examples of people on my road of happy destiny who do that. We have a friend who's just out of the hospital again. He's been in the hospital a lot over the last 4 years. He's been in great pain. From July of 98 through July of 99, he was in intense pain day and night. And they couldn't find out why, and they couldn't help him with it. And he never complained. I remember July of 98 walking into his hospital room with one of the guys I sponsor and saying, "How are you?" He said, "The important thing is, how are you?" Whenever I call him up, whether he's in the hospital or home, the first thing out of his mouth is, "How are you? What's going on in your life?" And it just so happened that that month, he was supposed to have gone to see an aging sister in Florida and a niece in state of Maine. And I said, "Well, what's this doing with your travel plans?" He said, "Duncan, you don't get this yet. God uses a different travel agent. I'm going to let God book all the flights." I had a bad year in 98. The second half of 98 really shook me up, and it was about stuff that I hadn't let go of. My career, finance, things I haven't trusted Bubba with before, and Bubba probably shook the tree up a little. And you could hear me scream from the podium of every AA meeting on the west side, "Ouch, it hurt." Well, meanwhile, George was in the hospital in total pain, never complaining a bit. I had some good examples. And what got me through that very bad 6-month period, here I am 10, 11 years sober when this is all going on, is the fact that I started hearing the voice of my higher power in the group conscience. Individuals like that, the men's group that I go to, the fellows that I work with, the fellows that I sponsor, and meetings like this, where people would come up and say, "You know, you're not a bad person. Something bad happened to you. That's all." People would call up and say, "How you doing today?" You know, when I think of AA, I think of you, and I really hope you get through this. I didn't even know who these people were. And those were just little God shots that came from being in AA. So I stand before you very grateful, hopefully a little more humble than I was 13 years ago, and definitely much happier. We saw a lot of families here tonight, people taking cakes, people getting married and having babies, people bringing their kids to meetings. And it's sort of been a family night. And you need to know that we have 2 types of families here. We get to get back our family of origin. I'm closer now with my sister in San Francisco than I've ever been, my aunts in New York and Florida than I've ever been. But I got something else too. Yeah, I go home alone, and yeah, I sleep alone. But I have a primary relationship with a higher power, so I'm never alone. And I have a family of choice. You know, I'm back to the same old routine I had when I was a social butterfly. I don't know which Thanksgiving invitation to accept. You know? If I'm lying anymore, it's about trying to figure out a way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone because I've accepted too many invitations for the same night. And that's family of choice. And it's my AA brothers and sisters, younger than me and older than me. I don't have to worry anymore. I have a road of happy destiny. Again, I want to welcome Sonny and Jason and all the folks who took chips. Again, happy, happy birthday to your birthday people. And thanks for being my group conscience.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, Wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.